Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Bright Horizons for this webinar on empathy building. At Bright Horizons, through our Toward a Better World curriculum and through meaningful classroom interactions, we are committed to supporting the development of empathy, caring, compassion, and social responsibility in young children. By focusing on connecting, caring, tending to the environment, community involvement, and diversity and peace. Empathy is the ability to move beyond ourselves and to recognize and care about the experiences of others. Developing compassion for others begins at home, so we're so glad to have you here today to learn more about how you can spark empathy in your child through your family's day-to-day life. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Kate Freeman, the Director of Internal Communications at Bright Horizons, and mom to a 6-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter who are two of the sweetest and most kind kids in my completely biased opinion. I'm a former blogger on the Bright Horizons Family Room blog, where I frequently talked about trying to infuse kindness and empathy into my children's lives, and I'm so excited to join you in learning from our esteemed guest. So before we meet her, I'd like to cover some housekeeping notes so we can make the most of your time on the webinar. First, we have a live chat going for today's webinar on Twitter using the hashtag BHParentWebinar. If you want to follow along, join the chat or retweet to your followers. You can do so right from the webinar console by clicking on the Twitter button. If you're not on Twitter, no worries. The chat room is open. Please use it to exchange ideas with others, and we have several Bright Horizons folks in the chat who will be sharing resources and their own thoughts too. You can access the chat by clicking the blue button with the chat bubbles. Through the webinar today, we'll toss out some questions you can discuss there in the chat. And here's one to get us started. It's a general question, so no right or wrong answer, but tell us in chat, why did you join today's webinar, and what do you hope to learn about empathy? And while you're answering that, just want to go over a couple of rules for the chat. There are hundreds of you on today, which we're so excited about, but we ask that you refrain from profanity or trolling and be respectful of people's ideas. We also ask that as much as possible you keep the chat on topic and avoid controversial statements. And unfortunately, violators will be removed. Okay, moving on to the purple Q&A button. Please use this button to report any technical issues today. We have folks on standby who are happy to help. And finally, the resource button. You can use that to download webinar resources at any time. We have a number of resources in there for you that are really great, including a kindness tree worksheet, a selection of service projects from the Bright Horizons Foundation for Children, and articles about empathy building written by Bright Horizons early education experts. So feel free to download those at any time throughout the webinar. All right, without further delay, let's meet Eileen. Eileen Henderson is the National Director of our Brightspace program, which is part of the Bright Horizons Foundation for Children. Eileen, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Kate. Hi, everyone. I am so honored to be your presenter today for this really important topic. As you can see from the picture, I'm surrounded by my loved ones, and I am so proud that my kids have become thoughtful adults whose work choices reflect the values I really wanted them to grow up with, including social work, public policy, public health, and advocacy. They're all involved in the hard work of making the world a better place. I'm a proud mom. I was a center director when my children were growing up, but I was also an active volunteer for the Bright Horizons Foundation for Children. And they told me that watching and helping me with my community work really had an important impact on who they've become as adults.
That's so great. Thanks, Eileen. Can you also tell us more about Bright Spaces and the Bright Horizons Foundation for Children?
Sure, that's a pleasure. Bright Spaces are rooms and spaces that are designed by our Bright Horizons employees and families in partnership with a wide variety of really important agencies that support children and families in crisis to support their play and family bonding when families are really experiencing a tough time and lots of trauma, and they really need it most. Through the Bright Spaces program, our caring Bright Horizons family can support these vulnerable children through contributions of money, time, and talent. I am very proud to say that we have opened over 350 Bright Spaces across the U.S., Canada, and all around the world, and we've touched over 100,000 really needy children in a year.
Yeah, the foundation does such amazing work. If anyone is interested in learning more, you can visit the website brightspaces.org by clicking the webinar button with the link icon. So now let's take a look at what we're going to talk about today. We're going to divide our discussion into 3 parts. First, we'll define empathy and why it's critical. Then we'll look at the ways you can spark empathy in your child. And finally, we'll close with some great everyday ideas for ongoing empathy building. And if there's time, we'll try to do a quick Q&A at the end. So Eileen, can we start off basic? Tell us, why is empathy important?
Well, empathy is so important as we look at how children develop the values that they'll have for the rest of their lives. Brain science tells us that the development of a conscience begins in early childhood with feeling sympathy, really seeing someone is hurt and feeling sorry for them. As parents, we can help that to then grow and evolve into empathy, a more shared experience, which can be followed, if we're lucky, by compassion and taking action. So sympathy is an emotional experience, sensing the emotions of another person, especially the awareness when someone is experiencing a negative feeling. You can see this with your young children when you're reading a book. So if you watch their faces, when you reach the character's emotional moment and your face reveals that emotion that the character feels, you'll see your child's facial expressions mirroring yours. That means you've drawn them into the story and they're in that process of developing what you could call compassionate harmony.
Yeah, this reminds me so much of an experience I had last year with my son. We had gone to a local school's production of Tarzan together as a special mother-son activity. And during the pivotal scene where Tarzan is saying goodbye to his mother, I turned to my son, and the emotion of the scene had caused him to start crying. And I was surprised by this, but I think it's so helpful as a parent to be able to say, okay, that is an expression of compassion, and that's a stepping stone toward empathy. Eileen, we saw a lot of questions come through during registration asking about the difference between sympathy and empathy and whether or not empathy is innate. So can you speak to that? And while Eileen answers that question, here's another chat question. How would you personally describe the difference between sympathy and empathy? So Eileen, what would you say?
Well, I don't think empathy is innate like sympathy is. It's a learned process, as is compassion. So let me give you an example. When a 4-year-old comes up to a friend and hugs them who's crying after seeing them fall down, she then demonstrates sympathy. Empathy is a little different. It's more of an intellectual experience that involves a personal perception and understanding. So in learning empathy, children recreate the circumstances and experience of someone else in their own mind. So a 3-year-old may suggest giving a present to her 8-year-old sister that she would really like. But, I like bears, so she must like bears. But an empathetic 6-year-old may suggest a book about hospitals because her older sister always talks about becoming a doctor. So that's the difference. Sympathy is experienced in the emotional center of the brain, what they call the lower brain, and through development and experience connects to that thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, to develop empathy. So they're both acts of feeling, and they're both really important. But with sympathy, you feel for the person. You're sorry for them, but you don't specifically understand what they're feeling. Where empathy is feeling with the person. It's putting yourself in that person's place. It's a much more active process. Empathy can develop into compassion, which is really cool. It's truly learned quality, and it translates those feelings of empathy into action. So it's the active desire to really help people who are suffering and to act in a way that has impact on that suffering. That would be our ultimate goal.
Yeah, that's great. I love these definitions because I think they really help identify that end goal for our children. And, I think we often see these small acts of sympathy, empathy, and compassion in the way children act towards one another. And I'm thinking of, how my children and lots of children will hug or comfort each other if they're sad or hurt. And it's so important to understand the difference between a sympathetic response and being able to intellectualize an empathetic response for others. So here are some responses we're getting in. Let's see. We have a question. My 4-year-old son is mistreating our family dog. How do we try to get him to be more empathetic to the dog's needs, which is an interesting one. And I think another thing that's important, people versus others, and importance for treating adults, children, animals. So lots of talk about animals and respecting animals. That's a really great one. I love that. All right, now that we have the basic definitions down, let's dive in and talk about the ways that we can spark empathy in our children. All right, Eileen, you have 6 concrete actions for parents. What are they?
Well, first, parents need to make caring for others a real priority in their family life. Then they need to practice that caring and gratitude and try to expand your child's circle of those they're concerned about, not just their family, and help them to look at others' perspectives. And, of course, be a strong moral role model. And then last, we'll talk about guiding children as they learn to identify and manage all those feelings that they have as they grow up.
Great. So let's start off with talking about making caring a priority.
Yeah, well, as parents, we all tend to prioritize our children's happiness and their achievements, and we hope for them to always be successful. And because of that, I think we all try to protect them from experiencing distress or failure or any bad feelings. Sometimes that leads us to try to fix problems and solve them before they have an impact. So I want to say it's important to remember that sometimes it's good for children to struggle. So let them hear and see the consequences of their actions, and then to hear your perspective. So when you ask about the value and concerns of others in a situation, that's sending your child a really important message. And to learn empathy, children need to learn to balance their own needs and the needs of others. That's really at the crux. Whether it's simply sharing a toy with another child, or an older child deciding to stand up for a friend who's being bullied. So what might that look like in your parenting experience, Kate? Let's say your child tells you about a situation where another child pushed them down. What should you do? First and foremost, I would say, always validate their feelings. That must have scared you. Did you get hurt? But then, to build their intellectual understanding, follow up with, I wonder why Rebecca might have pushed you. Do you have any ideas? Was she running fast? The idea here is to broaden your child's perspective on a situation so they can begin to see it from another person's point of view.
Yeah, and I think this is so important. I know I'm certainly guilty of trying to act as a fixer for my children, particularly my son, who is more sensitive. And I love this tip for validating their feelings, but using every situation to help them see from a different perspective, and maybe one that they don't have a lot of empathy for right from the start. So in the chat, does anyone else struggle with that feeling of the urge to jump in and fix problems, especially if it involved your child's hurt feelings? And if you don't, please share with us your secrets on how you resist. All right, what else would you add, Eileen?
Well, I guess as you'll hear over and over today, your children learn from you. They need to hear that you care about the other child's feelings too. They need to see that same caring for a friend, that it's a priority for you. So sometimes instead of saying to your kids, the most important thing to me is that you're happy, consider saying the most important thing to me is that you're kind. That means building the habit of asking your child after school, instead of were you good, try asking them, were you kind? Who did you help today? Did you make someone smile? What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's so great. I have to comment on the chat that's going on with, I feel better that lots of other people say they fail at this all the time, particularly with conflicts between siblings, because I am guilty of this constantly with my 2 siblings. So I empathize with all of you. But for years, I wanted to mention, Eileen, going back to your point, at our dinner table, we have done high-low, where you talk about the high and low for your day, and that's been a really impactful thing for us as a family to have that moment of connection. And, you know, as we worked together to start preparing for this webinar, and I was already soaking up your wisdom, we added to our nightly dinner the question, how were you kind today? And everyone had to go around and provide an answer to that. And I'll say it was a really helpful tool for reinforcing that it's a really important value for our family. And I think also as working parents, and, you know, my son is in elementary school, my daughter's at her child care center all day, it was a really nice way for us to indirectly model the way that we're kind when our children aren't with us as well, and to celebrate the times when they're kind when we're not with them. So it's been really, really useful.
That is really great, Kate. that reinforcement is so important. That's what's telling your child how you feel and what's important to you. And then taking an even deeper dive, and the next time you do this, is to explore how it felt and to learn what that kindness means to them. And then to continue to talk about it and to celebrate all those things with your family. It's a great tradition. I love it.
Thanks.
Another part of supporting empathy is really holding your children to a high ethical expectation. And the most important one, as we know, is admitting, acknowledging, and taking responsibility for their actions. Now, this doesn't mean just saying the words, "I'm sorry," but really helping them to see how their behavior impacted the other person. In doing that, there's so much you can explore, some of the ideas of what might make the other child feel better. So when your child does something that's inappropriate and they tell you, and you see or hear about it, maybe from a teacher, what do? So at pickup time, the teacher asks you to talk to your child about something that happened at school, and your stomach stinks, and you say, You say, "Well, what's up?" And they say, "I pushed Karen today." What should your response be? Again, I believe that in all cases, we have to start by acknowledging and validating their feelings. So you could say, "You must have had some strong feelings to push your friend. Can you tell me what those feelings were?" But then you need your child to begin to think about the other child. So how do you think Karen felt when you pushed her? She's your friend. Asking your child to put himself into his friend's shoes can really help them to change perspective. Then if you ask, "How would that feel to you if Karen pushed you down during a race?" And then finally, I think prompting your child to put herself in the other person's role and then anticipate what would be a supportive thing to do or say. Probably not, "I'm sorry." So you say, "What do you think you would need Karen to do or say to help you feel better?" Then your child will more than likely do just what came to their mind. So it's really fabulous that you can see that so much more deep, important parenting work can come from a situation that could have started your evening off really terribly. And instead of getting angry or prompting just a simple "I'm sorry," you could really use it as a wonderful empathy teachable moment.
Yes, and I would imagine that I am hardly alone in when you force the get out of jail free "I'm sorry," it sounds more like a snarl and the "I'm sorry," and it is definitely not sincere. So I think moving beyond that is so smart.
So lastly, it's so important to emphasize caring when you, parents, interact with other key adults in your children's lives. For example, ask teachers whether your children are good community members at school, encourage them to give you examples, and then support ways that they can create more of those opportunities for community kindness. So as I've said, your children are listening to you as you ask others how they're feeling today. And this is showing them that you are a caring person too, and that you hold that as a really important value.
Yeah, these are great suggestions. So tell us in the chat, what do you think about them and what do you want to try? But Eileen, now let's move on to practicing caring and gratitude. I have to say this is a personal favorite of mine.
Yep, I agree. Gratitude is so important to remember and so easy to forget. You know, the dictionary defines gratitude as one's readiness to show appreciation for and then to return kindness. Isn't that what it's all about? We could all improve in this area, but it's never too late to start with our children. So we all need to practice caring for others and expressing gratitude for those who contribute to our lives. You know, studies show that people who are in the habit of expressing gratitude are much more likely to be helpful, generous, compassionate, forgiving, and popular, and they're also more likely to be happier and healthier.
Yeah, in one of the few New Year's resolutions I've actually kept, started a gratitude journal this year, and it has made such a difference, just that moment each day of thinking about the things that I'm grateful for, particularly on those days where things are harried and stressful. It really just changes your whole perspective, and I think making that small priority in your daily life is the only way to make it a priority in your children's lives as well, and you really need to flex that gratitude muscle.
Exactly. Well said. Learning to be caring and grateful, it is like learning to play a sport or an instrument. Practice makes perfect. So daily repetition, simple things, helping a friend with a task or homework or pitching in around the house. Children learn the pleasure of caring for others and showing them that they're appreciated. Maybe taking care of that family pet. Try having simple but meaningful jobs available, like helping to scrub potatoes for dinner, watering the plants, feeding the dog, that children can do to help nurture that caring instinct and make it second nature. You know, some families create a family job chart in order to let everyone feel good about helping each other. My recommendation is that instead of rewarding your child for every act of helpfulness with money, you let them know you appreciate their efforts, and instead you reward them with your sincere comments about how thoughtful they are and how much it makes your day easier. Consider if you could create the value in your family that helping around the house, helping with siblings, helping with pets, helping with neighbors is normal. Everyone helps each other because we love each other. And this becomes your child's paradigm for living in the world. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Certainly when children go over and above and take on bigger jobs and responsibilities, they can earn an allowance and be financially rewarded for their hard work. But children will begin to internalize that feeling good about doing good. And that internal motivation is the best. But it's still important when your child really steps up and helps another, those uncommon acts of kindness, that you celebrate. They're making such a good choice with praise and recognition to your friends and family. It's a really important part of building your child's understanding of the world to talk about caring and uncaring acts that we all too often see on television, and about justice and injustice that they might witness or hear about in the news. There's so much craziness in the world today. You can always point out the good news stories. Find those helpers and heroes and talk with your child about them. Let them know there is good news out there. There are lots of great people doing great things, and we sometimes forget to see and tell our children about them.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I've definitely had trouble explaining some of the news of late. So in the chat, share if you've also struggled to talk about recent news and events with your children. I will say that this is a politics-free zone, but if you want to share something, tips or struggles, please feel free. So Eileen, what else would you add here?
Well, one idea, what you brought up, Kate, is to make gratitude a daily ritual. You can do it at dinner time, bedtime, in the car, or it's just on the subway. We often forget to express thanks for those who contribute to us and others in large and small ways. On the way home from school today, try asking your child how they think their teacher's day was today and why. And then ask if they can think of something kind and thoughtful that you can do or bring them the next morning. Something simple, a flower picked from the yard, a drawing, or whatever your child comes up with. And especially as the holidays are approaching, bring your child into the conversation about why we give gifts. If you give a financial or a commercial gift, that's fine, but let your child write a note that expresses what their teacher brings to their life and what they want to tell them they're grateful for.
Yeah, and you know, it's so funny when I think of my own children in this way, they really are the product of millennial parenting because they've really gone digital with the way they express gratitude. And my son, we actually set up an email account for him, and as he's learning how to type and engage with the computer, he's really loved sending those kind of notes of gratitude and you know, to the adults in his life over email. And I have to say, it's so funny to see the response because, you know, those are clearly nice, cute emails in comparison to the other emails those adults are receiving. So they've really been meaningful, I think, for him and for the people on the receiving end. And I've also found, you know, it's so hard when your children are not at an age yet where they can write a thank you note to figure out how to show gratitude. So we often do videos, particularly now with my daughter, to text to people. And it's such a great exercise because I think it helps her as we sort of talk through what she's going to say and sort of gets her in the mindset of being grateful for the things and the people in her life, you know, before she's ready to write a thank you note herself. So, Eileen, you mentioned job chart, talking about current events and daily gratitude. Tell us in the chat if these are some things you're already doing or what things you might want to try from this list. The next strategy you have is expanding your circle of concern. What does that mean? looks like we're having some trouble with Eileen's audio, so I'll try to add some
Oh,
thoughts.
wait, I'm back.
Oh,
I'm
she's
sorry.
back. Okay.
I apologize. So as the world seems to get smaller and sometimes scarier, we all tend to hunker down into our own somewhat closed circle of our families and friends. Those of you with one child know it's hard sometimes to get your child to know other children. So our challenge as parents is to help our children learn to care about someone outside of that circle, such as the new kid in class, someone who doesn't speak their language, even the school custodian or someone who lives in a different country. Exposure to difference is so important in building empathy, especially if our communities and schools are pretty homogenous. Parents need to intentionally seek out experiences that open children up to be exposed to people who look or sound different than they are. You may want to find a local organization to volunteer with, or find out if your child's center or school is working on a bright space, and bring your child with you when you volunteer. My children tell me that when my work with Bright Spaces, when I was a director at a center at the local homeless shelters, was a big part of their personal growth as they grew up, and helped them to build their empathy and compassion.
I'm sure, yeah. It's so easy to stay focused, too, on what's immediate, especially for children, but for adults, too. We all have busy lives, so this is a great point. And it kind of relates to your next point, too, right, about taking the time to examine other perspectives.
Yeah, I think it all seems to come down to expanding our own and our children's perspectives. Children need to learn to zoom in by listening closely and attending to those in that immediate circle, and then zoom out by taking in the big picture and considering the many different perspectives of the people they interact with daily, including those that are different from them. They also need to consider how their decisions help or hurt others. So simple things like keeping all the toys to themselves or not including one child in a group, to bigger things like allowing people to use hurtful words in a group without speaking out. Kids need to learn how their actions or their inaction can ripple out and really harm various members of their community. Especially in our more global world, it's really important for our children to develop concern for people who live in different cultures and communities than our own. Only by that exposure will they understand that these people who look, act, or dress differently are also a part of our community, and they're our neighbors and our friends. And I know it can be hard to think of things to do with your child to expand their perspective. You might start with just introducing your child to the culture of a neighbor or classmate who comes from another country, and show through your actions that you are a welcoming person, that you are open to celebrating difference. It's also a great idea to encourage children to learn to care for those who are more vulnerable. So give children some simple ideas. It's what I call stepping into the caring and courage zone, like comforting a classmate who was teased. Children need to be kind, but they also need to develop courage to take steps when they feel they safely can. So this is sure to prove important as they grow up and take their places of leadership in the world. So if you're with your child and you see someone who's disabled, consider being a brave parent and step up to speak with that person and respectfully ask them questions. Someone in a wheelchair knows that often children are curious or scared and will usually welcome an honest sharing of ideas with you and your child. I remember when my kids were little, I saw them whispering about someone in a wheelchair, and it was hard for me, but we walked up and we talked. And now our families have been friends for a very long time, and my children learned some really good lessons.
I love that. Such a great point. Important. I love the caring and courage zone, and something our kids and us can do. Some great responses coming in about chore charts, daily gratitude, and I love asking open-ended questions for your children about their day. All good stuff. This all actually reminds me of a recent experience we had with my son, where a classmate's parents told us that he had intervened when another child was making fun of this classmate, and asked the child to stop, and then comforted his classmate afterward to make sure he was okay. And my husband and I sort of, started in a tizzy saying, okay, we need to celebrate this. We need this to be something that he understands is just as important as any other big accomplishment that he has in school or in any other aspect of his life, because we really wanted to celebrate this type of behavior. So he got to choose dinner that night and dessert and to celebrate his kindness and his courage. And I have to tell you, he was beaming with pride and, told our waiter at the pizza place that we were there to celebrate his kindness, and you could tell it was really impactful for him that we celebrated it that way.
What a great example, Kate. You rewarded his spontaneous goodwill in his actions. You showed him how what he did fit with your value system, and you reinforced it by celebrating, so he'll repeat it again. Not by forcing him, but by celebrating his instinct to sympathize and then turn it into empathy and then to have the courage to act on another person's behalf. Compassion. What a wonderful thing. You should be so proud.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
As I mentioned, everything that happens today in the world is right in front of our children's eyes. I saw some comments about not knowing how or what to talk to children about, and it's hard. Using the TV, the internet, or newspapers. Do people still read newspapers? I guess so. To encourage your child to think about hardships that are being faced by children in other places. We know we try to protect them from some of the things that are going on, but hopefully they will never have that same experience. But by exposing them to these things in a controlled way that you can control and talk to them about, we can build their resilience to other challenges that they may experience. So much of starting these thoughtful conversations with your child really depends on their age and development. So by asking them questions, you can see what they already know, which may surprise you, and you can understand where the best place to start the conversation might be. So if you start with simple language, name the feelings that your child is familiar with, and then build a scenario that they can relate to. Like the children who are refugees from their homes must be pretty scared. Remember when we went to visit Grandma and you felt sad that you had to leave your room and your house? So this will give them a frame of reference to begin to feel empathy for a situation that's not within their direct experience.
Yeah, that's so important, and I feel like the recent natural disasters we've had have brought this up a lot. And I know in my house we've really been trying to talk about how we could help, and so we've collected some supplies, particularly those that we knew families with young children needed, like diapers and wipes and baby food. And we also made a donation to the Bright Horizons Foundation Hurricane Maria Fund, knowing that that money would go towards nonprofits in the areas affected that were dedicated to children and families. And you can learn more about that on brightspaces.org. But I imagine a lot of us have used these events as a way to introduce service and giving to our children. So please feel free to share your stories about that in the chat. I love them seeing the giving book, which is great, and in the chat and the kindness elves at our house, which is fantastic and a really nice alternative or way to use the sort of elf on the shelf concept, which is great. Love seeing that. So in your next strategy, you talk about us as parents being moral role models. So tell us more about that.
Well, as I said at the beginning, we parents do not get off easy in this challenge of raising a child with empathy and compassion. The bottom line is that children learn ethical values by watching the actions of adults they respect. They will learn your good and they will learn your bad. Sorry about that. Additionally, they will learn how you think about ethics, how you problem solve your own and your family's dilemmas. Although asking the question of whether to invite the new kid that nobody likes to her party might not seem like an ethical dilemma, it really is. Think of all the values in that question. So as you talk to your child about that decision, ask them, how will that child feel to be left out? How would you feel? Do you really know that person? Can you dislike someone without knowing them? And the questions go on and on. So these are great food for thought and discussion during a family dinner or on a long car ride. And really, these are the ways that you influence your child's path toward empathy. But, being a moral role model and mentor certainly means that we need to practice honesty, fairness, and caring ourselves. But it doesn't mean being perfect. All our children know that we make mistakes. For our children to respect and trust us, we need to acknowledge our mistakes and our flaws. Your child will see that sometimes you can make a mistake, but everyone can correct their course and do the right thing. I remember when my kids were growing up, I started a process called a do-over. So it was to help my children to redo kind of an uncaring action by role-playing a different behavior that maybe considered other people's feelings. Like I would say, start over and ask me in a way that makes my feelings not hurt. So that gives them a second chance and gives them to really rethink what they've done. I'm often also asked in my role with the foundation about the best way to do community service with kids. So in our busy lives, it can be a real challenge to find the right service opportunity and to find the time to dedicate to it. So an FYI for everyone on this call, the Bright Horizons Foundation for Children has answered that question. We've developed activities we call Brightening Lives activities that your center or school can do on site right at the center. They will help you learn about your child and with your child about local issues while having fun and doing something good for others in the community. So one example that a Bright Horizons Center director recently shared with me was in support of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is in October. She brought together her center's children, families, and staff for a Brightening Lives activity that happened at pickup time. So they had a potluck. They invited the local domestic violence shelter director to speak about her agency. And through the course of the hour, they created welcome bags for the children who have to leave all their belongings and find safety in a shelter. So this gave the families the opportunity to talk to their child about how it feels to be far from home and let their children see that their family values helping others in need. And all this happened while they were picking their child up from school. Really great way to fit this into a busy schedule. So just ask your center or school manager or check brightspaces.org for more info.
Yeah, this is so great because I think that is one of the things parents struggle with is how to include their kids in volunteer activities that don't feel suited to children. So these are so, so great. And we have some great resources for you in the resource box about ways that you can get your children involved with volunteering, so please check them out. And in the chat, please tell us, do you and your children volunteer or do other service projects? So tell us about them. And I'm seeing a great example of role modeling with a rule set for a 7-year-old daughter about putting things away, and when she finds the parents' shoes, she's calling them out for it. And we have the same experience with my 6-year-old. He is the hall monitor in our home. So I hear you, and I think responding to that in a respectful way is sometimes hard but so important. I love that. So what else, Eileen?
Well, just remember that you don't need a special event to talk about important issues. It should be part of life. When you're on your car ride home, after you ask what they did at school today and you're told they had snack, you can try starting a simple conversation about ethics. That's right. Try asking, what's the hardest thing for you to share at school? Or are there some children that you don't like to play with, and why? And that will give you an earful while you're navigating traffic and open up some new ways that you can get to know your child and teach them on the road.
Yeah, this is such a great tip, and I commute with my children. Both of them come to the center right near my office, so that car time is often such a perfect time to have those conversations because they don't have anything distracting them, and it's such a perfect time to engage. So tell us in chat, what are some of the ways you engage your child in these types of, serious conversations? Is it the car, the dinner table? Is it a bedtime discussion? Well, share with us. All right, let's move on to our final strategy, Eileen, which is a big one for many of us, especially parents with very young children, and that's managing feelings.
Well, as you know, we all know, emotions are at the heart of so much that happens with our kids. When things upset our children, and it's the same thing with us, our first emotions are often our negative ones. Anger, shame, envy, the feelings that really get us in trouble. So we need to teach children that all feelings are okay. Nobody likes to have someone tell them, don't feel that. We as adults as well as children. But all children need our help learning to cope with these feelings and to find helpful and productive coping strategies. So I'll share just one with you that I taught my kids. Very simple technique that many of you will recognize. but it can be taught to the youngest child and give them something to put into their bag of tricks to deal with their strong emotions. So simply ask your child to try a new exercise with you, and the more excited you are, the more they will be excited. So ask them to stop, don't talk, close your eyes. Then ask them to breathe in through their nose as slowly as they can, hold their breath as long as they can, and then let the air out of their mouth as if they're blowing out a candle really slowly. And then see if they can do this 3 times and guide them through it. When they're finished, tell them that the way they feel now is that calm and strong Travis, and that Travis is always inside him. All he needs to do is take those 3 magic breaths. Then when the next time you see him getting upset, remind him, take the magic breaths and find that strong and calm Travis. After a while, he'll start to do it on his own so that he can express his feelings in a helpful and appropriate way. If not right away, I promise you, he will have it embedded in his mind, and it will be there as he grows up, and it will come in really handy throughout his life. And by the way, you can use that too. It works for everybody.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah. So parents often ask about developmental appropriateness. When are children developmentally able to have these kinds of feelings? You'd be amazed how much sensitivity very young children have at a very young age. So let's go through some of the developmental milestones. At 3 months, babies can engage in a really important behavior called serve and response. This is an exchange between the baby and the parent that includes echoing each other's smiles, gestures, making sounds. You remember how emotionally satisfying and positive it is, really for both of us and the baby. That back and forth exchange is at the heart of all human interactions. Everything comes from that. Then at 6 months, babies have these brief conversations with others that kind of involve cooing and gurgling, using their hand or finger movements, smiling, and then they're mirrored back. And then the caring adult or an older child can extend those and make another face, and the baby goes back and forth. So that's a conversation that a 6-month-old can have. At 9 months, babies can respond with expressions of joy at a parent's happy face, and when a parent makes a sad face, babies show sadness, and they move their eyes away. They avert their eyes. So just remember how much effect angry words and actions can really still have in front of a baby. At 1 year old, a child can become agitated and disturbed when they view someone in distress, and someone that they love appears to be upset. Someone's yelling at each other. That will really disturb a 1-year-old. At 18 months, a child can try to comfort a loved one. That's that beginning, the very beginning of that sympathy. Someone who is visibly sad by means of a soothing voice or a touch. Then at 2 years old, children can act as if they know what others feel. So when a baby is crying, for example, a 2-year-old might say, "Baby is sad." Then at 30 months, children can pretend to be kind. They're acting this all out that they're going to do as they grow. They're taking a doll or a stuffed animal and pretending to feed their teddy bear. At 3, children can understand what other people's experiences are and that they have an effect on how those other people feel. So a child might say, "You sad, Mommy, you hurt your finger." At 4, children can understand, and this is very nuanced, that different people can respond to the same situation with different emotions. So, for example, Jason knows that when his brother loses a board game, he becomes angry, but when his sister loses, she claps, enthusiastic for the winner. So they understand that nuance at 4 years old. Isn't that cool?
It is. It's amazing.
So this is what's going on in the child's brain. Let's take Ramona, who's 3 years old. She sees a classmate fall off his tricycle and begins to cry. She stares at him for a moment, and then she walks over to give him a hug. So what happened in her brain? It's really the result of a sequence of mental steps. First, she notices the crying. Then she recognizes that what has happened, falling off his tricycle and hurting himself, is a problem. Then she realizes that she can solve his problem by giving him a hug. And then she takes action. So in just a few moments, Ramona's developing conscience motivates her to respond positively. He acts with a purpose to stop another child's suffering. So this is the development from sympathy to empathy and then to compassion. But always remember, you have, and I've seen it in the chat, you have a lot of resources at your disposal to teach your child all of these skills. Use those great books, some puppets, even storytelling that you make up yourself to provide children with these new scenarios that show characters that are following their conscience. You know, children acquire social knowledge through specific stories that will activate that empathy and compassion. And by identifying with the characters, children can feel a level of involvement that's really not possible in our everyday conversations with them. So look for the evidence of your child's compassion when their facial expressions and their body language are really animated and they're following along and they're feeling those feelings of the characters in those stories.
Yeah, and you know, in my house, Little Blue Truck is a favorite book for talking about this, and we've had many conversations about how Little Blue chooses to help the big dump truck, even though the big dump truck hadn't been very nice to him, and how important that is to be nice to people regardless of how they've been to you. So I know you have a list of book recommendations in the webinar resource pack, which you can download from your resource box. And some great stuff coming in about people. It sounds like bedtime is the winner for when people like to have these conversations with their children, because who doesn't want to delay bedtime? That's a great point. I don't know why I didn't think of that. So Eileen, can you expand a little bit more on how to use reading in this way?
Sure, and this is a great solution for any problem that you might see come up with your children. For example, the interest that people had in helping their child really understand that their pet has feelings too. Try using a story to provide that dramatic content. So whenever you read any book, you don't have to read the written words. Just talk to your child about what the characters in the book might be feeling. So if you have a book about pets, make up the language and ask them, what do you think this puppy is feeling? How do you think we can help? What's the impact of a child's actions? And do it even before the story does it. Then you can talk about what they might have done differently to solve that problem, or how other characters felt when that was happening. And that way you can create scenarios that follow your child's interests, their ability, and your concerns. So just sometimes you can sit down with your child and say, I'm going to tell you a story today, and make one up that maybe comes a little closer to home, and have it have a happy ending and help your child think that through.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. Thank you for all this great information. So Eileen, would you recap for us?
Sure. I would say, first, teach your children about their emotions. Kids can't empathize with what other people feel if they don't know how to put words to their emotions. So as your child goes through his day, make sure to point out which emotions you see him feel, and also which ones you're feeling. You'd be surprised how many very complicated emotion words your child can learn and understand and then later use. So words like embarrassed, excited, jealous, frustrated, uncomfortable, bored. I remember when my daughter was just 4, we were at the playground, and she was on a slide where there were older children pushing. And my little 4-year-old surprised everyone by saying, hey guys, can't you just cooperate? The boys looked so surprised. They said, wow, did she just say cooperate? So don't be afraid to teach your child the meaning of different emotion words so they can express themselves. Then read and watch TV together, and everything you do can bring an opportunity to share ideas. Remember what we said about reading? Don't just read. Discuss what the characters are feeling. And then after conflict, certainly not while your child is still in the heat of the moment, but after the conflict, discuss when they're separated and they've calmed down, go back and talk about what each child was feeling. Because younger children can be guided to figure out what they may have been thinking or feeling at that time, and that will really help them the next time. And this will help them to express themselves and give them the language so that they can move forward and solve their own problems next time. Then get them to see you resolve conflicts in your own life. Because almost everyone argues in front of their kids sometimes, even though ideally I'd say you should limit this. But the key to ensuring that any arguments that do occur don't have a bad impact on your kids is by making sure that if you fight in front of your kids, you make up in front of them too. And obviously, if you can't keep your tone and your words under control, just wait till the children are not around. But a good rule of thumb to remember is if kids never see conflict resolution in a relationship, they will really be unlikely to be able to solve and resolve conflicts in their own relationships. So make sure that when you do that, you take the other person's perspective and try to figure out a solution. Then remember to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. We talk about babies. It's certainly true of pets. They all naturally elicit empathy as kind of an evolutionary adaptation to ensure that they get taken care of by humans. So to make the most of this, discuss and wonder aloud with your child, what's my puppy feeling right now? Do you think he's hungry? What's the baby feeling? I think she's angry. And then model respect. This is really important for those who seem different. Introduce your children to differences in a really positive way. Let them know that you are interested and welcoming to a variety of people from a variety of walks of life and backgrounds. Without exposure to different people, children grow up to be the adults that we see on the news who are afraid of what they don't know. This is your chance to expose your children to the beauty of diversity. So these are just some tips that you can help your child to reach their innate potential to be empathetic and kind. Your child will learn the most from watching you interact with others. So now's the time to think before you speak or act in front of your children. So asking yourself what you want them to learn from you can really be an awesome and a humbling experience for everyone. We're all on this journey together.
We certainly are. Thank you so much, Eileen. In the chat, tell us what had the most impact on you today of all the great information Eileen shared. And Eileen, I think we have time for a few questions from participants from the registration process, and then I'll mention a few that came in today as well. So we had a lot of talk about pets, and I think you got at a lot of this before, but is there anything that parents can do to help children have empathy for animals and pets in their family?
Well, I think some of the things are I mentioned before to really help your child to see your pet as a fully developed living thing and to respect that they have feelings, that they feel hurt, they feel hungry, and that in a family of loving people, we love each other and our pet is part of our family.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I know another one that's come up a few times is around siblings and, a child who's empathetic or sympathetic to others, but maybe not so much to their sibling and how they can get them to show that same level of empathy to them.
Well, at its best, the family is really the safest place for a child to practice and to try out social behaviors. So when I'm at school, I would never push anybody. But when I'm home, maybe I'll try this out on my sister. So they try out some of these negative behaviors on the safest and sometimes the most vulnerable person. So as the older child has status, they can try out that status. That's what they want to learn. So they may not have any status at school, but they do with their sister or siblings. So it's important to understand those feelings. I always start with acknowledge them. You are feeling angry. You want to show your sister that you're the boss. So it's not condoning them, but let him know that you see that he loves his sister, but he wants to see how it feels to be powerful. So it's important that he sees the real life consequences for his behaviors. When he's unkind, he has logical consequences. You hit someone, you can't play anymore, or if you're mean, you're not included in the game. But if they're able, help them to verbalize how they feel. That will really help them. And then give some responsibilities to help the older sibling to have some status in a positive way. Explain that when you're bigger than someone, it's a chance to help them with things you can't do, and praise and then reward that responsibility.
Yeah, that's great. Another question sort of from the other end of the spectrum is about managing children who tend towards being oversensitive or empathetic. And I know I certainly have this struggle with my own son. For a child who maybe cries or gets distressed when they see other people who are hurt or upset, how do you help them manage that?
Well, I Again, I think that our identifying and helping them learn the language for the way they're feeling can really identify that compassionate streak in them. It's very natural for children to feel concerned when they see someone being hurt. And I think finding ways, a good idea is to talk to your child so that they can really articulate what they're feeling. Everyone feels better when somebody understands and acknowledges their fears. So it seems like you sometimes compare yourself to other people and are having trouble finding your own voice, or everyone has things about themselves that they're unsure of for older kids. And always use personal examples. Use yourself and say, I get scared too when I hear about some of the things that are going on in the world, but this is how I am learning to deal with it. Children sometimes see people around them as all being super confident, and it helps to understand that all people find ways to push through their feelings. So again, providing positive ways to cope with anxiety, like the breathing exercise, and giving some concrete strategies to just help your child maybe use their body to find their own strength. So you can teach some body awareness, like helping them with concrete strategies about standing up straight, breathing in deep, looking people in the eye, learning not to mumble, using a strong voice, making eye contact. Sometimes those things, it's like fake it till you make it. And giving those cues can help that passive child learn the internal tricks that other children already know, but that will help them to become strong and confident themselves.
That's great. All right, we'll have time for one more question. So, it looks like we are running out of time. But thankfully, Eileen has offered to do a blog post on the Bright Horizons Family Room blog, sharing answers to some more of the questions that have come in. So stay tuned for that. All right. So now to go through, don't forget to download all of the resources from the resource box. But if you can't download them now, you'll receive them via email next week, along with a link to listen to a recording of this webinar. And as this is the last Family Matters webinar of 2017, please take our survey to tell us what you thought of today's webinar. And also let us know what you'd like to see from the Family Matters webinar series in 2018. We take time to read every survey and every comment, so please, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to let us know, we would really appreciate it. You can access it by clicking the teal survey button. So Eileen, I just want to thank you again for sharing this amazing information and these tips about sparking empathy in our children. And I also want to thank
so much, Kate.
Yeah, and thank you to the Bright Horizons community for being here today to join us.
Thanks, everybody. I enjoyed speaking with you.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.